Hi, this is Desert Agave Fiber Arts. It is February 4th, 2026, and this is, I believe, episode 12 of the no, I think it's episode 13 of the podcast. And I want to thank everyone who came by to watch last week, whether you were one of my original viewers or one of the many people who has never been here before. Last week's podcast really got a lot more attention than I'm used to. Many more views than I've ever gotten on a previous podcast, and also many more comments, and the subscribership to this little boutique channel more than doubled. It's still a little boutique channel, but it's more than twice as much as it was last week when I recorded, and that feels different. So even though I'm sitting here in my room all by myself, I can feel a lot more people here, and welcome. You know, I tried to record this with even more beings in the room. I have two cats, and both of them were in here because they enjoy the sun that comes in this time of day. And I tried recording, letting them stay, and within about 2 minutes realized that was a huge mistake. They were both here on the desk, walking around, putting their bottoms in the camera, and I just thought it was a little more chaos than I can handle. Especially since this week I'm not working off a script like I was last week. I'm going off the cuff. And I realized if both cats were walking around on my desk the whole time, it was just going to be 20 minutes of me talking about my cats. Instead, let me introduce myself again. My name is Christina. I am a Latina, bipolar, autistic person with PTSD and ADHD, and yeah, those are my basic identities. I am a writer and a fiber artist, and I guess now a podcaster. And I've had this podcast for about 1.5 years, and it's been a real sleeper up until last week, and maybe it'll go back to being a sleeper now. I don't know. Let's see what happens. That was quite a response to my trying the experiment of recording 2 weeks in a row. This is now my 3rd week of recording in a row, so we'll see what happens. I want to share some things that are on my desk. I just took a drink of, it's literally just warm water with some fresh ginger in it. But I have these things that either I or a friend made on my desk. This is a little quilt that I made. I like to keep it on my desk just to hold anything, often a cup. And then my cup right now is actually resting on something else. Something made by a friend. A friend of mine quilts more official quilting than the hand-sewn quilt that I just showed you. And she made me a whole set of coasters, and I really like using them. I have a real soft spot for art that can actually be used. That just feels so much more satisfying to me in some ways than art that is just viewed. One thing I wanted to talk about today, I'm not even sure I've talked about it that much in 1.5 years, is I've always been pretty open about the fact that I have a mental illness, and I do that because I want to try to reduce stigma. But I'm not sure I've really addressed it at length, and I thought that this week would be a good week to do that, especially because I kept getting feedback, both in the comments and some people who I know who viewed it, who then talked to me about last week's video. They talked about how calm and grounded and soothing I seem, and some people thanked me for giving them a space of calm, and I'm so glad that I was able to do that, truly grateful. And it was also such an interesting compliment for me to hear, because like I said, I am bipolar and I do have PTSD, and that means that it is very busy up in here. I have ways that I have come across to create calm, and I guess I project calm to the world now, which makes me happy, but that is not necessarily my base state. You know, I have had my bipolar diagnosis for a very long time. I was diagnosed when I was 23, and I'm now in my early 50s, so about 30 years. And my PTSD diagnosis and my self-diagnosis as being autistic, those are both much more recent, within the last couple years. And as I've met other adults, especially online, and I introduce myself in that way, In autistic spaces, the response I tend to get is, well, you are probably not bipolar. It's just a misdiagnosis that is often given to women with autism, who are autistic. And that's true. I mean, I've read enough to know that that's true, that there are a lot of people who are mistakenly diagnosed as bipolar when they're not. I can say with some authority that I am not one of them. I am someone who is both autistic and bipolar. And I say that because I have had many, many depressive episodes in my life, and I have had a handful of manic episodes. And two of those manic episodes in my 20s went all the way from hypomania to full-blown mania to actual psychosis. And if you follow the link to my author website and you look at the page that says works published or something like that, there's a list to some essays that I've published online. And those essays, a couple of them at least, are about experiences I had when I was psychotic. And being psychotic is terrifying. It's also terrifying for the people around you. And the first time I became psychotic in my early 20s, I had no idea that my family had a history of bipolar disorder. I didn't even really know what bipolar disorder was. Back then, it was often also sometimes called manic depressive disorder. I didn't know what that was either. I was first told about the family history over the phone while I was in the middle of a psychosis. And that is not super great timing, not super helpful timing for when to be told that news. I was not capable at that point of processing it in any kind of a helpful way. And I went on to have a very terrifying time. I was eventually taken to the hospital where I was in 4-point restraints and had one of the most terrible experiences of my life. You can read about it. I'm not going to go into detail here. I don't want to introduce that kind of trauma to this. So I'll just say that it was very scary. And I came out of the hospital, the time in the locked ward, which was also very scary. And I had a lot of feelings. Anger was a big one, also sadness, self-loathing, all those terrible feelings. And it literally took decades to work through them. I went to grad school, and it's very funny to me because I went to grad school in my 30s to get an MFA in poetry and then eventually creative nonfiction. And if you look at my dissertation, the whole intro is about how this is real art. This is not therapy. I am not giving myself therapy. Now, years later, I'm like, yeah, it was therapy too. Who cares? Why can't it be art and therapy? Why do I have to draw that line? But it took a lot of writing and a lot of art and a lot of thinking and some therapy to work through all those many feelings. And one of the feelings that I came out with right away after my bipolar diagnosis was that I was never going to keep it a secret. It was very clear to me that it being a family secret had hurt me very directly and very terribly and very avoidably. And I just thought, I need to make the world safer. I need to make the world safer for me. I need to make the world safer for other people with bipolar disorder and other mental illnesses. And eventually, when I had a child, and also it came to, I need to make the world safer for him. I don't know if he'll have bipolar disorder, but he certainly could. That's certainly a thing that could be true of him. And I don't want it to be a secret. And it never has been for him. Ever since he could talk, he has known that his mom has bipolar. When he was very small, we didn't say much. I would just say, well, I'm going to my doctor. It's my doctor for my brain because I have bipolar disorder, and that's all he knew. And gradually, as he got older, I would say, well, bipolar disorder means that without medicine, sometimes I'm very sad, and sometimes I'm too excited and I can't sleep. As he got a little older, I would add, I've had a couple times in my life where I was so excited, so manic, and I couldn't sleep that I started to see things that weren't there and hear things that weren't there. And he would just kind of take it in. It's always been a fact of his life. It's a very boring fact of his life. I once got an essay published while he was in grade school. And he wanted to know what it was about. And I said, well, it's partly about being a mother and being bipolar. And he thought about it and he said, that sounds like a really normal, really boring thing to write about. And I was like, I've done it. I've done the right thing, because this just seems really boring to him. But it also means that as he gets older, if he starts to exhibit signs of bipolar, it's not going to be a shock. And I hope that he will know, if we haven't managed to notice it ourselves, he will know to come to us and to say, what's going on? I feel strange. So that's partly how I've made the world safer for him, by educating him, but also my writing, a huge part of it has been to make the world safer for people with mental illnesses, just by taking away the stigma by talking about it, and taking away the ignorance by talking about it. One thing that my boyfriend, now husband, told me during my first hospitalization was that during my time in the emergency room, which was very terrible, one of the doctors told him, she's so far gone, she's not going to remember any of this. You don't have to worry. This is not going to be with her. And that doctor was really wrong. I remembered every single terrifying minute of it. And so one of the things I wanted to educate people about in my writing is, even if someone seems really far gone, even if they're in full psychosis, that doesn't mean there's not a person inside. There's always a person inside, and that person is worthy of care and communication and tenderness and all those things that people at the time thought I didn't need, because they viewed me in that moment, I think, as not being fully human. And one of the things I've always wanted to communicate is that when people are like that, when they're seeing things, when they're hearing things, they are still full beings, full humans. And that's a long tangent to bring me to the idea of me now being grounded. I spent a lot of time in my adulthood processing all of this and reworking it over and over again, processing the trauma, processing the anger, processing the shame. And it was effective. I eventually got to a place in my late 30s where I felt grounded enough that it felt safe for me to have a child. Earlier, before then, I just felt like I wasn't a stable enough person that I trusted myself to be the kind of parent that I wanted to be. And in my late 30s, I finally had this moment of thinking, I think this is a thing I can do. But even then, I still had more work to do. And a huge, huge piece of that work for me has been the fiber arts. Not just knitting. I actually started with embroidery and moved on to garment sewing with the vintage machines behind me. And then I started knitting and spinning, and I still dabble in the garment sewing and the embroidery, and they're all very important to me. And that kind of play and artistic creative play was incredibly healing for me in many, many ways. For one thing, it allowed me to access joy. I gave a sermon at my church, my Unitarian Universalist church. I always say that because it's a very different kind of church than what most people think of when they hear the word church. I gave a sermon about this, a daily grounded, reliable practice of joy, last spring. And that's because in my earlier adulthood, joy was something that I had a very difficult time accessing. And that's because I was terrified of becoming manic, because I knew that if I became manic, chances were I wasn't just going to stay at a little bit manic, I was going to go into psychosis. And one of my life goals, honestly, is to never experience psychosis again, and to never make the people around me have to experience me being like that. So it meant that if I felt happy, if I felt giddy, I would immediately second guess myself. I would be like, wait, are you becoming manic? Calm down, stop. And it meant that I didn't really have a good way of being joyful. And that led to a lot of depression, just years of low-level depression. And when I started playing with embroidery and fiber arts and then knitting, I discovered that these practices brought me a lot of joy, and they did so in a way that felt safe. When I was knitting, I felt the thrill of making something. I felt the rhythmic meditative energy of it. I felt how the wool feels between my fingers. And all of that brought me great joy, and all of it felt safe. I never thought for a moment that in the middle of my knitting I was going to fly off into outer space. And that was huge. And I've expanded that practice since then from the fiber arts. I'm not going to show them to you today, but I will eventually. I've started experimenting with drawing and painting, and I'm writing more than I was before. But I consider all of it to be on an equal plane. It's all playing creatively. And as long as I play creatively every day, I feel like I've done what I've needed to do. I used to have a lot of guilt about not writing enough. Now I don't care about that. I just care about my daily creative practice. I do what I want to do, and when what I want to do is right, it flows out of me in a way that it never did before. And the joy flows out of me in a way it never did before. And I guess maybe because my way of accessing this joy is specifically in this very grounded way, I guess it has led to a more peaceful projected energy. It's a really interesting thing for me to hear, because I don't think of myself as peaceful. I guess because peace is something I've had to work for, I still think of myself as what I was before I worked for that peace. I think of the young woman who was so full of self-hatred and anger at this family secret, and fear of the world that it was going to hurt her because of her mental illness, all of these different things. That person was not a peaceful person. She was in a lot of pain, and it's taken a long time to work through that pain. And I'm so grateful to the fiber arts for giving me that. And I guess I'm grateful to those of you giving me this feedback on the podcast for making me see that I guess I've done a lot of work, because I think if I had started recording something when I was, say, 25, the energy you would have gotten from me would have been very different. And, you know, that 25-year-old needed a lot of love and positive reinforcement too. But back then there wasn't YouTube, so that wasn't an issue. But the PTSD diagnosis is more recent. That has actually been incredibly freeing as well. There's a feeling I get when my PTSD is triggered. And before I knew that I had PTSD, I thought that was like a kind of a negative mania, is how I thought of it. I thought, oh, this is the kind of mania where you don't feel good, you feel terrible, but it's mania. And that means be careful. It might mean that you're about to shoot off into outer space. And since getting my PTSD diagnosis, I've realized, no, that feeling, it's not mania at all. It's trauma. It's your reaction to trauma. And that sounds strange to think that I was happy to get a PTSD diagnosis, but I actually was, because it freed me in a large way. I used to feel like I was a bipolar person where the bipolar wasn't that well controlled, and I realized my bipolar was actually better controlled than I thought. It was my PTSD that needed some work, and I've been working on that. I'm very lucky. I have an excellent therapist. I also have a really fabulous psychiatrist who I've been seeing her for close to 20 years now. She's genuinely been life-changing for me. It's also, it's a very sad thing, because psychiatrists like her are not necessarily accessible in the way she was accessible to me to most people. She doesn't really take insurance. My husband has a PhD and a science job, and it's meant that we've been able to afford to pay for her out of pocket. I've been seeing her monthly for almost 20 years now. And she doesn't just talk to me and give me meds. We talk for an hour, and we have a relationship at this point, a pretty deep relationship. And that was one of the first things that really led me to stability. I'm very aware that the stability is a thing that many people don't have access to, because the way our country sets up healthcare is, like many other things, deeply messed up. But anyway, the PTSD, it's allowed me to work on the trauma in a way that I wasn't able to before I knew it was trauma. It's allowed me to have a lot more sympathy for my younger self. Just to realize that the things in my childhood that I used to think weren't like real trauma actually were real trauma. I mean, I just kind of felt like they must be, because if I had PTSD, that meant it was real. And I've been doing a lot of hard work with that in the last couple of years. And of course, work on trauma does not in itself feel joyful. It's often very, very hard. But I had all these voices in my head that were sort of parroting things to me constantly all day that I heard growing up, very negative things. And the work on the trauma has helped me work with these voices. I mean, it's been a journey. At first, I would just tell the voices, clam up, stop criticizing me like that. You don't have to say anything. And now I've come to view those voices as with a little more compassion. And I will tell them, I'm okay. You don't have to try to take care of me by criticizing me like that, because I've got this. And that progression, among other things, has definitely given me a lot more inner calm than I used to have. And it means that my life has a lot more joy, and a lot of it is very grounded joy. And I'm happy that I can share some of that with you. Wow, I've been talking for 20 minutes. I am deeply afraid that this has been really boring, and I apologize. This is supposed to be a knitting podcast. But I wanted to talk about that. The next thing I want to jump to, which is kind of related, is something I've talked about in this podcast before, back when we only had a handful of viewers, was I talked about how joy is resistance. And what I also tried to bring up was that part of joy as resistance is that feeling joy is resisting, the fascist state, but also it gives you inner strength. And that inner strength is something that I feel like people have a responsibility to use to do more resistance, because the world's really scary right now, and we need to do what we can to make it better. But I was at my UU church this weekend, and we had a guest preacher. At first I was very suspicious because this young man was young. I don't know how old, but looked to be in his 20s. And I was like, this person in his 20s, what does he have to say? Well, that was a real bias on my part. It was one of the best sermons I can remember ever hearing there, to be honest. I'm going to link to it below, and I'll let you know what time the sermon begins, so you don't have to listen to the whole service if you don't want to, but it's really worth listening to. And the basic premise of this sermon, among other things, was if joy is resistance, that means also resistance is joy. And I felt like that was so much more of a better way of putting it than how I'd been trying to get to it over the past year or so. Very much that the idea that working to resist oppressive systems in and of itself can be and should be a joyful thing, if at all possible, and that the work itself gives you strength to do more work. That felt so true to me. I talked a little bit last week about how some of my volunteer work has been fundraising. That's not the only volunteer work I've done. I used to be a teacher, and I've been doing some teaching more recently on a volunteer basis, again, to try to help out the immigrant communities in particular. And it's hard work, but it does bring me joy. It does bring me strength. And it just helped me so much to realize you can flip that. It's not just you need to feel joy and that joy is resistance. It's that resisting itself is an act of joy. And I think that brings us a little bit to last week and the discussion of red hats. I think a lot of people in making red hats for themselves and families and friends, and I've had so many people tell me in the comments that they're making these hats and giving them to people in exchange for people donating money to good causes. And that kind of resistance is bringing a lot of people joy. And that's a good thing. We need the joy. And it's good for people to be reminded doing this kind of good work brings you those good feelings, and hopefully it'll inspire all of us to do yet more of that good work, because there is so much more that needs to be done. And at the same time, a lot of people have to balance what they can do and, what is possible, essentially. Definitely me with my mental health disabilities, there is only so much I can do before I basically shut down. And I know that it's my responsibility to figure out where that level is so that I can keep myself well. Because if I shut down, then I'm not helping anybody, including myself. I need to keep going so that I can keep doing the work. And the fiber arts, my knitting, helps me find that level. Also, just being very self-aware helps me realize when I need to rest or when I can do more. And the teaching that I've started doing in the last month, that was me thinking, I think I have a little more energy to do something more to help, but I think I want to change it up. I don't want it to be more fundraising writing. I want to do something more directly with people instead of sitting at my desk by myself. And it's both exhausting because as an autistic person, I find people kind of exhausting, but it's also very fulfilling. It's both at the same time. Just that feeling of helping out a real specific person sitting across the table from me is deeply rewarding on a level that I'd kind of forgotten about. So, so again, I really encourage you, if you need a lift, follow that link that I share below and listen to this sermon on joy as resistance and resistance as joy. It doesn't really talk a lot about God, if at all. It's very much inspiring. I think people of many, many different faith backgrounds or no faith backgrounds would find it an inspiring thing to listen to, and I hope you take the time because it's so worthwhile. Now, I promised you I would talk more about my actual knitting, and I'm going to do that now. That's your reward. I've noticed most podcasts, if they talk about sort of more political things, they save it for the end. I guess I'm flipping it. I'm saving the knitting for the end. That's the reward for sitting through me flapping around about all these things that maybe I do or don't know anything about. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is my beautiful cardigan. This is the Victory cardigan. I will link to the pattern below again. It's written by, I forget her name, but it's written by the owner of the Woolly Thistle, which is a mostly online yarn shop that sells what they call woolly wools, which is really what I prefer. I prefer, because just on a sensory level, I've discovered woolly wools are what make me feel happy when I'm using them. So this is a cardigan that both has steeking, which I'll talk about in a second, and it has shaping. And I made some changes to the shaping than what the pattern says. The pattern has some optional bust shaping if you want a little more space for your bust, and then it has decreases for your waist, and then it has increases for your hips. Now, if you look at my body shape here, I do have a bust. There's not like a super lot of decreasing that goes on after the bust. So I thought about that, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do the bust shaping and do some increases in front for the bust. And then instead of doing the decreases, I just kept knitting. I did the increases, and then I kept it that way. I kept the front a little bigger than the back. And I knitted down, and I got to the point of my waist where if I was going to knit more, I would definitely need to do some increases. My top is one size, and then from the waist down, I'm about 2 sizes bigger. So if I'm going to make something that's going to fit over both my top and my hips, I either need to do some A-line shaping, which I often do, or I need to knit a very oversized size on top that will then be less oversized over my hips. For this one, I decided what I really wanted this cardigan for was to winterize my summer sundresses. So I thought stopping at the waist would be good. So I just stopped there. And then I did a lot more ribbing than the pattern calls for. I did a good 3-inch chunk of ribbing, which I'm really happy with how that looks. And I love how this looks. I mean, as you can see, even sitting down, it fits very well over my body. I have these great buttons that I also bought from the Woolly Thistle. They are pewter buttons from Norway. I really think they're lovely. And then, I think I showed this off last week briefly, the steek stitches I hid behind a ribbon, which also is something that I got from the woolly thistle that is imported from Norway. But here's this ribbon that hides the steek. And now steeking, for those who don't know, is when you take scissors and you cut your knitting. So I knit this whole thing in the round, and then when it was time to turn it into a cardigan, I took some scissors and I went snippy, 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 snip. Very scary, right? The thing that was great about making this is that it was not scary at all. Two reasons. One is that I decided to use the technique of needle felting before I did the steek. So I spent some time taking a little pokey needle and just going poke, 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 poke all up and down along the line I was going to cut. And I knew or hoped that that would make it so that even once I cut it, since it would be a little felted, the yarn wouldn't start to unravel. The other thing is, I've got a ball of it here. Let's see. Yeah, I've got one that still has the band. So the yarn is Roma Garn Vams. It's a worsted weight yarn, and look how fuzzy and woolly it is. I mean, this yarn likes to stick to itself. That's what it's like. That's what its deepest desire is to stick to itself. And it was really fun to knit with, and it meant that with some needle felting and just with its own inner nature, cutting it didn't feel scary. I felt like I was doing what the yarn wanted me to do. It was like, yeah, cut me. I'm not going to go anywhere. And it didn't. It was so fun to do this thing that you normally would never do, to take scissors to your knitting and to have it be just fun and thrilling instead of scary and destructive. And then I sewed down the ribbon. You know, I didn't really have to. The steek stitches were just sort of a little roll down either side, but I thought the ribbon was beautiful. I wanted to have it, so I did sew it. Sewed down the buttons, knitted up the button band, and it's really one of my favorite things that I've made. I wear it several times a week. The winter has not been very cold this year, so most of the time this can also serve as my jacket to go outside, as well as a nice cover up inside. And this is indeed a sundress that normally I couldn't wear this time of year. It's a universal standard dress. Universal standard has a really good size range if anyone doesn't know about it. It can be pricey, but things can be had on sale. I pretty much exclusively shop from them when there's a sale. And they make sizes up to, I think up to a 40. I'm not positive about that, but they start, you know, with extra small and they go all the way up to quite plus size, which I'm very thankful for, being quite plus size myself. Now, the thing I was intending to work on as I talk to you, but I guess I can't talk and knit that well, is a cardigan. It's just, my whole life is one by one ribbing right now. When I'm out of the house or knitting in the car, I'm knitting on red hats, which is mostly one by one ribbing. And then when I'm at home and I'm knitting on my knitting at home, I'm knitting on what will be the waistband of a cardigan, which is all one by one knitting. I've got about 1 inch more that I need for this. And what I'm making is Andrea Mowry's Come Back Again. This project kind of snuck up on me. I was supposed to be working on something else. I was working on a worsted weight sweater. But the thing is, we've barely had a winter here in New Mexico. Normally it does actually get cold, where you want to wear worsted weight sweaters, but it's mostly been so warm that I was like, when am I going to wear this thing? I'm going to finish this worsted weight sweater in mid to late February, and it's going to be too warm to wear it. And I felt so frustrated that I ended up swatching for a different project. And I had this yarn. It's woolen spun, marketed as fingering weight yarn. It's I think it's Barrett Yarn Company. They're Wisconsin woolen. I got it for Christmas a couple years ago. And I had been knitting it into a fingering weight winter t-shirt, but I was really having trouble getting the yarn to work on the gauge, and the fabric was really stiffer than I wanted it to be. It just wasn't working. And the Come Back Again uses sport weight yarn, and I just figured, okay, well, if this woolen spun fingering weight yarn isn't really working at a fingering weight gauge, that probably means I can use it for a sport weight pattern. So I did some swatching for this pattern. Kind of geniusly enough, the swatches are the 2 patch pockets, and I enjoyed making those, and the gauge worked out. So I ended up making 1 sleeve, and then I made another sleeve, and at some point while I was making sleeves, I was like, okay, I seem not to be working on my worsted weight sweater anymore. I seem to be making a sport weight cardigan. And I'm glad I am, because when I finish this sport weight cardigan, I'll be able to wear it. It might be really warm by then, but I can wear it as a jacket in the chilly mornings or in the evenings. I might even be able to wear it in the summer when I'm inside and the AC is a little too chilly. It just feels good. Like I said earlier, I like to make things that are going to be used, and it feels good to be working on something that I think will get real use. And I will still make some worsted weight sweaters, but my soul needed to make something that I could see myself using a lot, and I decided that this come back again is what that was. So I'm really enjoying working on it, and this wool it just feels so good to me. It's so springy, that woolen spun. It's wonderful, wonderful yarn, and it's gonna make a really gorgeous cardigan that will winterize yet more of my dresses. Okay, I've been talking at you for 36 minutes. I promised myself that I was gonna end at 30, so we got a little extra bonus time. But I felt like it would be weird not to talk about any knitting. I will be back next week. I don't know what I'm going to talk about. I will be thinking about it all week, and when next Wednesday comes, I will come up with something again. Thank you for sitting with me during this time. I hope at least some of what I said made sense. If you have a mental illness of your own, I hope you feel seen. If you have a loved one with a mental illness, I hope you feel like you understand them a little more. And if you've had very little experience with mental illness, I hope I humanized it for you. I hope you realize that people with mental illnesses are people. And like all people, like all beings, we are worthy of and we need love and care and understanding and empathy. And I just hope all of us, as we find our joy in resistance and our resistance in joy, we go out and we practice that empathy in the world. And I will see you next week. Thank you.